Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the new edition of our Reading and Writing Handbook. My name is Danny Shapiro, and I'm on the marketing team here at Hawks. Our speaker today is Sarah Quinn, Hawks Learning's English Product Specialist. As our English specialist, Sarah develops and maintains the English product line. Sarah joined the Hawks family in 2017, and since then, the English team has launched the English Composition with Integrated Review course and 2 new print resources, Foundations of English Guided Notebook and Foundations of English Grammar Workbook. If you have any questions, please enter those into the question and answer box located on the panel, either at the top or bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them at the end of the talk. On that note, I'll hand it over to you, Sarah.
Cool, thanks, Danny. Hi, everyone. As Danny mentioned, my name is Sarah Quinn, and I am a lead editor for the Hawks English materials, including for this Reading and Writing Handbook for the college student that I'll be sharing a bit about today. So for this very brief webinar, I will be giving a brief overview of the handbook itself in case any of you are not familiar with the resource. And the majority of time I'm going to spend focusing on some updates that we've made in the research portion, part 5 of this handbook, specifically APA, in accordance with the new APA 7th edition guidelines that were released in October of last year. And I'll also be focusing on some updates that we've made to include better representation and more inclusive examples and more relatable writing samples and example illustrations throughout the entire resource. So just sort of talking about the types of changes that we were looking for as we updated this from the 1st edition to the 2nd edition. And hopefully we have a few minutes at the end for some question and answer. So as Danny mentioned, if you do have a question, you can go ahead and enter it into the chat box and I will get to them at the end. So to kick off, this Reading and Writing Handbook covers reading, writing, critical thinking, research, and grammar. And it does so in a very straightforward, comprehensive way. We present these really foundational reading and writing skills in a way that is easy for students to either use this resource as a refresher if they have been away from these concepts for a while or learning them for the first time. These sort of foundational skills in reading and writing are concepts that any student, really, regardless of their major or their field of study, will really need to know in order to be successful in their academic career. We take a very example-heavy instructional approach in this resource and actually all of our other English materials. We include a ton of contextualized examples at the word, sentence, paragraph, and essay level, because we want to give students a very solid foundation and a solid framework of the skills that they need to be familiar with enough to sort of demonstrate their understanding of in their own writing. We've also included exercises for immediate application. So threaded throughout these chapters and sections of this handbook, we have little exercises sort of at every stop of the way so that students can be kind of practicing the skills that they're learning immediately. And we also, like I mentioned in this resource, as well as all of our other English materials, we use a very approachable and conversational tone to present these concepts, because we want students to be able to focus on these tough skills that they need to be mastering rather than having to navigate any sort of stuffy or hard to understand language and terminology to present the concepts. We take a very conversational tone so that they can just really focus on what they need to focus on. And lastly, it does have a very user-friendly design and layout. We know sometimes handbooks can be a little bit off-putting if the font size is very small or if the pages are very text-heavy without a lot of images or color or section headers to sort of break it up. We've gotten a lot of great feedback, even on the 1st edition, about how sort of user-friendly it is and easy to navigate from topic to topic to find exactly what you're looking for. Moving into the development and enhancement process, really Hawks as a whole takes a very contributor-centered approach to product development. So we rely very heavily on instructor and student feedback in terms of creating the 1st edition from scratch of any product, as well as moving from one edition to the next. So we collect this instructor and student feedback through a number of different avenues. We use often semester-long review projects that involve feedback journals and surveys so that we can sort of collect this feedback and instructors and students' feelings about the materials in real time as they're using them throughout a semester. And in this instance, as well as all of our other instances from edition transitions, we use this feedback and insight that we've collected over a number of months and actually years as a basis for the next edition enhancements and revisions that we implemented in this resource. And again, this applies to all of our materials, not just this handbook. So moving right into the research updates portion of this webinar, I will be focusing most of this section on APA updates in our chapter 18. We've also made general updates, enhancements, and errata fixes in all of the research portions, actually the entire book. But because the scope of the changes was the largest in the APA chapter, that's what I'm going to be taking the most time to focus on. Like I mentioned before, in October of last year, APA released 7th edition guidelines that did have some pretty substantial changes from the 6th edition. So we knew that we wanted to update our materials to be in accordance with these guidelines and get them in students' hands so that they have the most up-to-date reference material as soon as we could. So kind of kicking off the APA chapter here, I've included screenshots throughout this entire presentation so that you can really see what I mean without just listening to me explain the types of changes that we've made. I want you to be able to see what I'm referring to. So we kind of kick off this chapter with a general bulleted list of some style and language guidelines and updates that students will need to be aware of so that they can make sure that their APA essays are in accordance with the 7th edition. Some more specific changes entering into this portion. We have made the running head optional. I believe in the APA guidelines, word for word, it says that running heads are no longer required for student papers, but we did still want to keep it as optional in case we do have some instructors who prefer that their students leave this in as a component or a nice practice, to exercise that skill of understanding how to shorten the title and sort of maintain the main idea. So we wanted to keep that as optional. Another specific change was we've also updated the heading level styles, which actually changed pretty significantly. You can see here that we have included a figure that illustrates exactly how the heading should look. What you can't see surrounding this figure in the actual text, we've got some detailed tables and charts that illustrate exactly how to arrive here. So the specific capitalizations, italics, and punctuation that students should be applying for each heading level. We've also removed publisher location from reference entries. So as you can see here on this screen, and I believe the rest of my slides in the presentation, we have kind of a two-panel view of the old edition from the new edition. I just wanted to give you a specific illustration of exactly what we've changed. So publisher location was one of them. You can see we've removed that in the instructional content and the directions, as well as the specific example reference entries that we have at the bottom of these screenshots. Similarly, we've removed retrieved from and DOI labels from electronic source entries. Again, we do so in all of our examples, as well as the instructional content that points that out, just wanting to kind of maintain consistency in all of those areas and give students the most up-to-date examples and instructions. We've also updated the in-text citations for 3 or more authors. I believe in the APA 6th edition, this et al. For in-text citations was standard for 6 or more authors, but because with 7th edition now it's 3, we wanted to update this area and give specific attention and care in these types of areas. And I also just want to mention this correct and incorrect visual that you see at the bottom of this screenshot. This is the type of sort of visual illustration that we've actually threaded, not just throughout the resource or specifically APA, but this type of visual students can expect to see in all of the other sections and parts and chapters as just a way for us to present, again, those contextualized examples so that students, for almost all the concepts, can see exactly what they should be doing, and sometimes even more helpful to see what they shouldn't be doing and what they should be avoiding. So just using those kind of easy to comprehend and understand presentation of these contextualized examples. We do have sample essays in our APA, MLA, CMS, and CSE sections. We've updated all of those sample essays to make sure that they are the most up to date with their current edition guidelines, as well as fixing any errata. But I just wanted to point out that, of course, we have updated the APA sample essay so that it follows all of these new guidelines. And all of the sample essays in each section include footnotes that sort of point students' attention to some key components of the research paper that they maybe need a little bit more context on and information and direction so that they can be implementing these components correctly in their own research papers. And I wanted to also include this screenshot from our MLA sample essay. I won't be, like I mentioned, going extremely in-depth into what we've changed in other areas of the research section, but I did want to include really and truly errata fixing is one of the biggest areas that we do look for from a new edition, from an old edition to a new edition. It's not the most glamorous thing to show off, I'll admit, in a webinar, but it is a very, very top focus for what we work with our instructors and our students that we collaborate with to sort of paint a full picture of everything that we need to change. And of course, that does include errata. So that's an important factor that we look for, and something that we did spend a lot of time combing through every word, every page with a very fine-tooth comb in collaboration with our instructors to make sure that we are presenting the most correct, up-to-date, error-free materials that we can for our students and for those reference points. So again, not very glamorous to show off, but it is a very real portion of what we changed and our improvements from one edition to the next edition. Before we get into the sort of second part of this webinar, talking about our updates to our terminology and representation, I just want to start with a disclaimer that these screenshots that I've included here and the specific types of examples that we've changed, this is not by any means meant to be a sort of catch-all or blanket fix to an issue that is as complicated as inclusivity or exclusivity. Any sort of diversity changes that we've made, I do not mean to trivialize any of those issues, but I do feel very strongly it is important to me as a person to be making strides where I can. I know my team at Hawks feels the same way, and Hawks as a company feels the same way. The one way that we can first be better is by really taking a close look at our materials and updating areas that we can and taking steps for improvement. So with that disclaimer said, I'll just sort of highlight some of the types of changes that we've made in this arena. First and foremost, the conscious use of they and their as inclusive alternatives to gender-specific pronouns, singular and plural. The first instance that we do this in the resource, we do have a footnote at the bottom of the page, as you can see here, sort of explaining the rationale and the reasoning behind why. We've also updated the terminology in many of our example sentences. So in the old edition, we've replaced instances of boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, or husband, gender-specific terminology. We've replaced that with non-binary terminology like partner and spouse. We've also made it a point to look for areas where we can include better representation of individuals of all genders, all walks of life, all ethnicities, all backgrounds. So kind of trying to widen that scope of the authors and directors and artists and the names and the figures that we include in our example sentences and illustrations. We wanted to make it a focus to really widen that scope of the individuals that we're including in these example sentences, tables, charts, scenarios, and phrases. We've also updated the example sentences and scenarios to be more sort of realistic, relatable, and meaningful. It's kind of a strange concept to sort of explain, but hopefully these screenshots sort of illustrate the types of changes that I mean. You can see in the old edition, this example sentence: for extra credit, attend the festival on Saturday. Taking example sentences like that may not necessarily be as relatable or something that all students can really connect to, and updating that in our new edition to something more meaningful, like for extra credit volunteer at the community center on Saturdays. So something that's a little bit more attainable for all students to really understand and connect with those experiences. Similarly to the example below, if we're including a sentence on demonstrating how to use brackets to add extra information, we say in the old edition, I love my new car. We can swap that out, kind of a simple change, but I love my new calculator is something that maybe more students would be able to sort of understand and connect with, sort of an experience that doesn't necessarily exclude any group of people. Improved writing samples. So again, kind of going on the same idea of just making the sample outlines, paragraphs, and essays that we include more meaningful and use stronger writing. So you can see here in this old edition screenshot, we have an example outline for chronological paragraph structure. The topic sentence of which is 3 things contributed to my most embarrassing moment: tripped on the stairs, dropped my phone fell on my principal's head. As we were going through this book, we really just wanted to take a very close look at the types of example writing that we are demonstrating and providing to students and strengthening it where we can. I felt that this was a very clear area where we could make it more strong and more meaningful, more topically appropriate for college level writing. So you can see in the new edition, we subbed it for 3 personal experiences contributed to my passion for a career in social work. The example events that are listed are a little bit stronger, a little more clear, and a little bit more, again, just appropriate and more meaningful for a college level writing course. And lastly, this is the last sort of screenshot and example that I have to share, going along the same lines of just analyzing areas, taking a closer look at what we can make a little more approachable and inclusive. This old edition, the screenshot is from a paragraph in a full-length sample essay. I believe it's in the reading section, but the old edition first sentence of this paragraph starts off, "It's hard to imagine why any human would choose to consume preservatives when we see the effect of preservatives on food." Looking at this as an editor, actually, it's not very hard to imagine why any human would choose to consume preservatives, because very often preservative-free food and organic food, fresh options, they're more expensive and they're not accessible in a food desert. They're not accessible at any convenience store. So just really taking a closer look at things that maybe can sort of express the tone that we don't necessarily want to express, and something that we can improve and make a little bit more relevant and applicable and meaningful and less exclusive. So you can see the new edition, the unnatural effects of food preservatives should deter customers from ingesting heavily processed fast foods. So just looking for small areas like that and making sure that we are sending the right message and expressing the tone that we really want to be expressing, and just really being more conscious of how we are representing individuals and making sure that all of our examples are as relevant and meaningful for students to sort of connect to as we possibly can. So that is actually all I have prepared today for this very brief webinar, but hopefully, Danny, you can let me know if we have any questions.
Thanks so much, Sarah. We already have one question in.
Okay.
The question asks, how our handbook is different from handbooks from other publishers, and what areas does ours stand out? Do you feel ours stands out as better?
I do feel like our research portion is extremely thorough and extremely developed. It is very granular, specifically in the example reference entries. It does include CSE. I don't know if that's, a research style that's very typically covered in composition courses or reading and writing courses. But I do feel like our handbook really stands out specifically as a resource that students can use throughout their college career. So it's not necessarily just a composition-focused handbook, but it is a handbook that will help students of all disciplines, something that they can throw in their backpack and refer to, whether they're writing a paper for Composition 1 in their first year of school, or whether they're writing an essay as a junior microbiology student. So this handbook is definitely a resource that is not just sort of focused on the scope of a Comp 1 course, but is something that any student of all disciplines can sort of rely on for a cleanly organized sort of snapshot of all of these reading and writing skills that they would need to know. And specifically, not to go on too much, but I do also feel that in terms of just the layout and design and organization of our handbook, we have gotten a lot of great feedback even throughout the course of the first edition, because some handbooks can be, just a little bit harder to navigate, smaller font, but we do break that up really nicely. We've got it very sort of clearly color coded. We've got lots of icons, images, kind of dividers that make it really easy to use and sort of flip from one place to another and get exactly what you need to get. Good question.
Our next question is, are there any reading strategies in the handbook?
Yes, we do have active reading strategies, pre-reading strategies, as well as some annotation strategies for sort of active reading, more meaningful reading, reading comprehension. And we also include some critical thinking skills, so strategies for as students are reading, analyzing evidence, looking for bias, looking for conflicts of interest, understanding the main idea and supporting details. So we do have a section on reading and writing critically, specifically. Yes, we do. Good question.
Another question is, will this handbook be available as an ebook?
Yes, it is. It already is actually available as an ebook. Danny probably could speak to details and price about that, but yes, I do know for sure that this is an ebook form.
Yep, we would be happy to send you more information on this, but both instructors and students can access the digital version of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question.
Okay, another one here. Do you provide online resources for students to find variants of MLA works cited and in-text citation formats? The section in these books are rather simplistic and do not cover some types of sources students use.
That's a good question. We did expand the MLA portion, specifically our MLA 8th edition, to include more source types and reference types. So specifically talking about different types of containers, how to format those, how to look at electronic references as well as print references, webinars. I believe we also included referencing memes even and YouTube videos, so sort of expanding and diversifying those types of source entries. And we also have included in certain areas links to like Purdue OWL that students can go to get some more detailed information and some outside examples, but that is an area that we focused on improving in MLA and APA as well as CMS, making sure that those examples are clear and a little bit more of a clear picture of all of the different source types that students might need to incorporate into their references.
And another question, is there a workbook available with this handbook for further practice?
We don't have a specific workbook that corresponds directly with the content in this reading and writing handbook, but we do have a grammar workbook, and that is specific concentrated grammar practice. It's a print workbook, and it includes exercises with grammar and style and language. And we also have a couple other print resources, guided notebooks that include exercises and things like that. But this reading and writing handbook, like I mentioned, does have some practice exercises. This is not, I would not suggest this as a standalone grammar workbook or workbook itself, but we do have some exercises throughout here, and we do have a grammar workbook available. And we are looking for ways to sort of expand our print offerings.
We have another question asking about the ebook being available at the college library. I'll tell you that we'll have somebody reach out to you. I think that's going to be case by case depending on the specific schools. So we'd be happy to have someone connect with you and work with you on that one. another question here, are there readings that can be used for analysis?
We do have some sample essays in here. It's not necessarily a reader, so we don't have, literature passages, fiction and nonfiction. We don't have necessarily published reading passages in this handbook, but we do have some full-length sample essays in specifically the reading and writing portions that students can kind of analyze. Those sample essays that we've included do have footnotes to kind of point students' attention in the right direction as they are reading and analyzing the samples that we provide them. But we are working on, we're in the works of developing a reader, a standalone reader, in which we will include reading passages like this that I assume you're looking for that are literary, but in terms of reading passages that are published or literary pieces, there aren't too many in the handbook other than the full-length sample essays that we provide students for analysis.
That is the end of our questions so far. Joyce has one more question about how students purchase and pay for the book and get access to it, and we will have someone follow up with you about that. Betsy similarly asks when the reader will be available. I don't think we have a set date that we're ready to announce that yet, but like you said, it is on the way.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you to our audience for a great Q&A. Hope we were able to answer your questions about this. We'll be reaching out and connecting further with a few of you about your specific questions. Sarah, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate everyone being here. We did record this and we'll be emailing out the recording if you weren't able to make the beginning of the webinar today. If you find yourself having more questions, Sarah's provided an email here, or you can email us at marketing@hawkslearning.com. And hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Danny.